Hey guys,
So
welcome
kind of
back to the Hypertrophy Academy YouTube. Thank you very much for tuning in. We have episode two of what I am now labeling a podcast. I was unsure if I would make it an official thing, but this is the Hypertrophy Academy podcast. Today I'm on with Juan, and I'm not going to attempt to say your last name. So please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Thank you for having me on. My last name is pronounced Samudio, but I'm not in my ideal setup right now, just because I'm a little out of I guess, my traditional setup for recordings and stuff. But my name is Juan Samudio, and I am a student at Florida State University, located in Tallahassee. And I'm studying biomedical engineering, with my focus being in muscle hypertrophy, which isn't, you think biomedical engineering, it's hard to, it's not like you take biomedical engineering and then they teach you about hypertrophy, but it's like the modeling and the systems that you use and the mathematics that you use in biomedical engineering. It's a lot easier from going to like those difficult things down to something like physiology, rather than going from physiology to something as complex as like learning how to model all these certain things and systems and things like that. So I decided to go with biomedical engineering and then possibly do a PhD, focusing on specifically hypertrophy, but using the skills that I learned from biomedical engineering to take
Mm.
that to hypertrophy, which I think is something that many people lack in.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who went through exercise science, exercise physiology, and didn't do any science in high school because science was not my thing. I just happened to get into a science degree because I was like, actually, training is really cool. Maybe I'll do like a rehab degree. It's kind of something similar to like PT in America. And going from no science to like first year physiology, chem, organic chemistry. Like I ended up doing well, but it's really, really hard to go into that. So I think it's an interesting point to, and I think your description of coming down to physiology is pretty accurate based on my understanding of what you would be studying in your actual degree. But I think that that is sort of reflected quite well in your content. You have a really nice way of interpreting things and explaining things, and that is part of the reason why you're on today because you have not only a unique view and maybe a view that needs to be heard by maybe some of my followers or people who are only getting their information from one source. I'm a big fan of sort of not only just learning myself from multiple sources, but also then giving both sides of the story to my viewers as much as I possibly can. Like, this is what I believe, but you could also consider this and you should probably form your own opinion. And so I think that you're one of the few guests that can really understand our side, well, not our side, but you know what I'm talking about, the more sciencey, whatever you want to call it, side of things, TikTok, whatever, but also then provide a really good nuanced take on the opposing side, you know. And when we get into things, it'll become clear what sides we're talking about here. But as I said, I really appreciate you coming on. And I think, as I said, you do have a really unique background and view on things. So basically, the for you guys listening, the motivation and sort of the idea we had for today was let's go through a few topics that Juan and I have spoken about probably multiple times now in DMs or in posts and stuff, and just go through our opinion, not so much like digging into the data and going over, oh, like this study said this study said this, but more about like what are the principles that we're following? What do they mean? And what are the implications if we're wrong, right? So one of the examples is like, okay, what if stretch mediated hypertrophy does apply to every muscle? The implication of not believing that, what would it be, and how would it affect our gains and our systems and whatnot? So we're going to go through a few pretty important topics, in my opinion, and some of them are quite popular at the moment, and sort of unpack them and then go, okay, look, what if we're wrong? What would we do instead? So hopefully that makes sense. And I think that the first one I want to jump into was stimulating reps. So for you guys listening, the stimulating reps model, the theory, the effective reps theory, whatever you want to call it, I don't know, maybe but I think they're within the last 10 years, roughly, they're sort of become a bit more popular. Basically, they just tell us that like in a hard set to failure, the last like five or six, maybe seven, are the ones that are beneficial enough to cause muscle growth, right? Based on motor unit recruitment and mechanical tension and all that sort of thing. And you guys listening, I'm sure many of you are very, very familiar with it. What is your opinion on that model? And what do you think is the implication of believing only the last five reps are beneficial? Now, obviously, I have an opinion on this and I've been quite vocal about speaking against like, oh, sets of four are the best thing and all that stupid stuff. But what's your take on that?
Uh, Honestly, I have no idea. I think it leans more toward the simple side of what could be going on. Um, I actually did want to eventually make a post on this. I just haven't had the time to really dig deep. But from what I have been able to see, I really do like to side the um, with Greg Knuckles and Menno Henselmans. If you guys know who those people are, they're very popular, and they put out good content most of the time. And I think Greg Knuckles wrote a really good article on this that was very long. I'd say that where he lies is kind of my stance, where the stimulating reps or the last 5 reps are the most stimulating, can be somewhat simplified. I mean, I don't know if your stance is more so like, is it only because there's some people that say it's only the last 5 reps that matter. But then there's also like, what about like, there's other reps before that, maybe like the eighth rep, eight reps in reserve. Maybe that can possibly cause similar hypertrophy than the fifth rep. I don't know. I know Stuart Phillips, another popular. He's a researcher, popular researcher. His stance is also similar to what Greg and Menos is, but essentially he kind of goes by every rep is effective because how do you get to the effective rep without the one before it? Now, that's not to say something ridiculous where it's like, oh, if I do 100 reps and they're all effective. No, I mean, that's stupid. But, if you're doing like a set of failure from 30 reps or from 0 to 30 reps, like you eventually need those prior reps to get to those effective ones. I think that's what he stands on. For me, I think you can make an argument if we stick by that the last 5 reps are the most stimulating. I think you can make an argument saying that, well, 3 reps in reserve, those reps can be more stimulating than the last two or the 1 rep in reserve stimulating. Why? Because the fibers, like if we talk about like fiber force, I don't know if we're speculating here, but the force that the muscle fibers can produce may be higher within those reps that are a little shy away from failure. And therefore, the activation may be better. And therefore, the signal for mechanical transduction and all that can be stronger.
Why is
However, and I
that?
made a po- and I'm because I mean the fiber force is higher. They're able to produce more force more efficiently. And I made a post about this. I was like, which one is the most effective rep? Um, but you could also make an argument saying that, well, the ones closest to failure are probably more stimulating because the activation needed or the muscle fibers may be recruited more. There are more muscle fibers being recruited because we're getting closer to that failure point, and therefore, because there's higher activation, therefore there is higher mechanical transduction signal, right? The signal that leads to hypertrophy. And I think that comes down because reps to failure are submaximal contractions. I believe that's what they are. I guess we could get into how motor unit recruits or how motor unit recruitment decreases with high forces on maximal efforts versus submaximal efforts. But technically, or to summarize it, with maximal efforts, we see that the net motor unit recruitment tends to decrease, with some motor units even dropping out. But with submaximal efforts, we kind of see like a net, a little more complicated, but we see kind of like a net increase in motor units being able to be recruited because if you're using submaximal load, kind of gives it some space or some leeway for motor units to be recruited. If you just use a max load, max motor units, but then they have to fall down because they're already maxed out. A simple way of saying it. But that's kind of like my stance. You can make an argument for both sides, which
Mm.
the reps closer to failure, the reps shy away from failure within that 5 rep range or that 5 rep model. But in terms of like the whole simulating reps model about it, I don't think I'm in the best state to talk about that. Not now. But I don't know if you want to kind of elaborate what you mean by the 5 rep model or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I'll sort of if anyone's not familiar, basically the model, I think it was originally made by Borge, and I think he's actually spoken since and sort of said actually maybe it's not exactly like that. Chris is obviously still a big, fan of it and pushes it. I mentored with Chris Beardsley, and I think that, disagreement aside on some things, the models that he uses and I've seen them play out and be really helpful. And that is not to say that necessarily everything is perfectly true and everyone should adopt it and train that way. But as someone who has, taken those models over the course of a couple of years, used it with myself, used it with clients, I can say that those things do work. And that's sort of why I want to use specifically, because it's, we can have opposing views, and sort of go, okay, well, this is what, say, maybe Chris and Paul say, and this is maybe what you think. And then, okay, well, what is the actual practical difference, right? Because I think a big problem in the industry at the moment is everyone can read a Patreon article, everyone can go through Chris's stuff. And I was saying this to Jake yesterday on the podcast we recorded. Everyone can go through and read those articles, but who can actually apply that stuff? And that is where I see a lot of like actual teenagers making posts and maybe misleading people, and because they don't really fully understand it, but they also certainly don't have the data to see and to say how it plays out in person, right? And I think that that's why I have a bit more confidence in some of you, say, Chris's methods, right? Where I've seen how they played out. I've used them myself with a heap of success. My clients have too. And obviously that doesn't prove that they are true. It just shows that like some of the things we not us necessarily, but the community as a whole disagree on, really in practice it makes no difference, right? And I think this is that stimulating reps conversation where this comes in. Like, let's say that the stimulating reps model is true. Obviously, for you guys listening, if you're still kind of confused about what it is, I would Google the Henneman size principle. Basically, just like as we do a set and the reps approach failure, the motor unit recruitment gets high enough to where we are actually stimulating some growth. And basically, apparently, it only sort of happens in those last 5 or 6 reps. And maybe it peaks at like 1 rep in reserve, which is why you hear people saying, oh, don't train to failure. Like, not only does it not have more motor unit recruitment, but it also has like more fatigue potentially. And we might touch on fatigue later. But when it comes to, okay, what is the practical difference between, say, what you're saying and the stimulating reps model, right? I think the big difference, and I'd love to hear your opinion too, is okay, well, if we believe the stimulating reps model, we might have people, saying if you go above 5 reps, you're stupid, right? And shit like that. And we have seen that. And it's particularly annoying to if you do this, you're stupid. I hate that sort of post. But what you're maybe alluding to is maybe actually that 8 rep is better than 5, even if the motor recruitment is slightly lower at the start, even if it is, dare I say, slightly more fatiguing. And I really personally don't think that there is a big difference between 5 and 8. Maybe even 10. I personally, I mean, data aside, like 8 reps, 10 reps, I really think that if we're under 10, it's more or less all the same isolation wise. Maybe on some bigger compounds, those lower reps, doesn't feel as demanding cardiovascularly, and you can, I'm certainly not doing ten reps on a pendulum, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7. But when it comes to those isolation, even like lateral raises, like I don't care if I do 10 reps, right? And I think that a lot of the time worrying so much about nitpicky things like whether we should do 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 reps has more of a negative effect than the positive effect of saving some energy or saving fatigue. So when it comes down to it, whether or not we believe the stimulating reps theory or not, I think we can all agree that maybe do you and I agree that maybe 10 is there a benefit to going above 10, I guess is the question I'm about to ask you.
I maybe in some contexts, I guess, if you're just, I would only go above 10 reps if I'm doing a warm up set just for practice, just to
Sure.
feel the movement, feel the exercise. I probably go above 10. I don't know. I like to get some blood going sometimes, whatever that means, whatever that does.
Lube the
But I
joints
just like,
up.
yeah, lubricate them a bit. But I mean, with the stimulating reps, the reason why I haven't put so much time into it is because no matter what, I just feel like at the end of the day, we know that we need high intensity. And, it's pretty high when we get to like the last 5 reps before failure. We could argue whether it's 8, but I mean, I like the reason why I like the stimulating reps is just because I know I'm close to failure, and it's likely that those reps close to failure are the ones that are the most stimulating. But I mean, I know that fatigue can change things. So that's where, if I'm going to make the argument, you can kind of go both sides. Whether is it like the like the 5 and 4, 3 reps from failure that are more stimulating, or is it the 1 or 2 reps shy of failure that are more stimulating, depending how fatigue plays out, how the activation looks like. that's kind of like where I start seeing an interest. But other than that, I mean, at the end of the day, I'd like to train hard, and to do that, I feel like I have to get around 5 reps to failure.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that, practically a big issue with oh, let's stop at 2 reps in reserve, right? Okay, let's say not that stimulating reps model necessarily says you should stop at 2. I think Chris has maybe said maybe about 1 is where activation peaks, and it's like there's not really a huge, you sort of see it plateau, maybe even drop in that last rep to failure, right? Because of fatigue, or whatever else. Um, okay, let's stop at 1 rep in reserve, and then people have taken it even further, and they've gone, okay, let's stop at 2 reps in reserve because it's calcium ions, right? And we'll get to that. Um, but the thing is, you tell someone to train at 2 reps in reserve, they're not. I don't care like who it is. Like, maybe JP, maybe Jordan Peters knows what 2 reps in reserve is. If you don't train like that, I don't think there is any ever an excuse for like the second half of your block to be 2 reps in reserve. Because realistically, like you're not. And if you want a better example of gauging intensity, go look at any power lifter, do any of their week 4 singles, look at the RPE they give the singles. They're almost always wrong or lying about it. And I just think that training to 2 reps in reserve is giving these people, especially these young guys who don't know how to train to failure, is giving them way too much credit in terms of gauging their own intensity. So you might, write down, oh, this week we're going to 2 reps in reserve on fucking curls or whatever. And it's really 3, 4, oh, fuck, who knows, 5. I mean, we've all seen that clip of Dr. Mike where he's like, okay, that's enough reps, and the guy does like 9 more. And it's like, so if Dr. Mike can't judge it, viewing someone objectively based on rep speed, facial expression, etc., there's no bias there really. Like, how can you judge your own intensity very, very accurately? And I think that, like I said, it's giving these people way too much credit where we say 2 reps in reserve, even 1, and we're like 3, 4, 5. And of course, it goes back to the point you made, which is that's boring. I don't go to the gym to do 2 reps in reserve. I'm not going to train to maximize hypertrophy, even though that is like my thing on the internet is like maximizing growth, right? That's not why I go to the gym. Realistically, I go there to train hard. And if I actually believe 2 reps in reserve is better than 1 or failure, I still wouldn't do it. I don't believe that. But even if I did, I wouldn't do it.
I mean, the way, yeah, I think for me, like whether training to failure or not, I don't know if 1 rep in reserve is much more different than going to failure, and whether that 1 extra rep to failure is a lot more fatiguing where your gains are just going to go off the table or fall off the table. Like for me, like if I'm doing a 1 arm dumbbell preacher curl, I'm very likely going to go to failure. Like at least 1 rep shy of failure or just stop at failure. And that's it. The way that I think of it is that if I'm doing a shoulder press and I can't perfectly gouge out my 1 rep from failure or my rep of failure, and I stopped like 2 reps from failure, I'm like, okay, whatever. I think that was still effective, right? Like I'm not
Of course, yeah.
freaking out. I'm not freaking out because I'm like, I mean, I think the stimulus is still going to be relatively similar. If I'm doing a bench press or a machine chest press, I'm kind of lazy. So if I don't want to gouge out that failure one, I kind of be like, I'll stop 1 rep shy, and I feel like I'd get something similar. Like I'm not being like, oh man, I didn't train to failure. I'm 2 reps away from failure. I'm gonna miss out on a lot. I don't think so. Like I always fluctuate between 2 and 0, depending what exercise. And if I don't get 0, if I don't get 1, if I get 2, I'm like, all right, well, whatever.
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's a much better approach than like obsessing over the fatigue mechanisms and whatnot. Like I made a YouTube video, some of you guys may have seen it. It's called Should You Worry About Fatigue, right? And I went through the 4 different main mechanisms or only mechanisms, whatever, and just spoke about, okay, when should we worry about, CNS fatigue? Okay, well, maybe we don't train 6 or 7 days a week because maybe that's a little bit too much. Spinal fatigue. Maybe we don't do like a big 10-second pause before we start the set in like an isometric position where you're like sort of loaded. Let's say the top of a T-bar where someone is like they're not dead hanging, they're not completely relaxed. They're holding on before the first rep and they take 5 seconds to start. Maybe we get a bit of desensitization there where it's like maybe you should have just started the set earlier, right? Maybe things like that. Maybe with the calcium stuff, we don't do massive big stretches for 15 seconds and a super slow tempo and blah, blah, blah. maybe, in terms of the metabolite stuff, maybe we don't do big pauses in the shortened position and super high reps, and we don't rest for 10 seconds between sets. Outside, if you're not doing those things, in my opinion, as someone who's like, believe me, guys listening, I've been through the fatigue stuff, with Chris himself. I just don't, there are people saying, and you've spoken out against this. There are people saying, "Oh, like that last rep is like heaps of calcium fatigue. It defeats the rest of the workout." I understand the logic behind it. I've heard Chris say it to me. Like you guys listening. I'm not just like shitting on something that I don't understand. Um, I just don't see it actually playing out that way. Like I know what it says in the studies. I know the conclusions that these people have come to, and I'm not dissing Chris at all. I had an amazing time in his mentorship, and I'd recommend it to a lot of people. But I just practically I don't see it playing out the way it's been maybe hyped up to play out. And that's obviously, anecdote, and that's not a great form of evidence. But I think it's important to note, like, as someone who understands it and has also used the methods with a lot of people, I think the big thing in terms of intensity is just maybe we don't go to failure all the time because like it's just going to put your CNS fatigue up a little bit. If we train to failure all the time, maybe we affect motivation a bit more because we have more arousal and then we have to like get ourselves back up there for more arousal. A set of zero RAR failure on the leg press, that's a big deal. And if you're listening and you don't think that failure on the leg press is a big deal, like you're probably not really going there because it takes, at least for me, it takes quite a bit of like time between warm-ups and the top set and arousal in the form of like putting my phone away, concentrating, music, things like that, where it's like that takes a toll. And maybe, constantly training to failure is a bit unsustainable in the terms of motivation and arousal. Whether the calcium stuff matters as much, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I think for me, the big thing in terms of failure is just like maybe we're a bit healthier and maybe there's a tiny bit less of an injury risk if we just over the course of the year don't train like we're gonna sort of never be back in the gym again. Like maybe if we just leave that tiny bit, it's a bit safer. And also maybe it's a bit more sustainable. But I'd love to hear what you think.
I mean, I don't really have much to say on it because it's not like my views are completely different. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into the whole fatigue thing and calcium ions, but I mean, your
I'd love to hear
overall.
your calcium take. I'd love to hear it.
Well, first of all, I think many people confuse calcium fatigue with calcium damage because there's no such thing as calcium ion related fatigue, in the sense that it is like calcium damage. I know some people say damage is like fatigue, just more extended. Fatigue is just a little more temporary. But in reality, Dr. Arthur Chang, uh, he is one of the elites when it comes to fatigue. And what they found pretty clearly is that the main cause of fatigue peripherally, within the muscle, is just impairment of calcium release from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That's the main mechanism of fatigue. Now, of course, there is that whole debate of perception of effort. Mark Hoya does a lot of work on that, and he kind of says that um, at least with loads below 70%, I would say, of one rep max, it could be that the main cause of your fatigue is just in your head. But if we're looking at it from like a physiology standpoint, the main cause of fatigue is just impairment of calcium release, right? Now, damage is something else. Damage is where calcium accumulates in the cytoplasm or whatever. Um, and that can lead to the activation of calpains and the degradation of structures and things like that. But I mean, I spoke with Dr. Ayaka Tabuchi, who is a student from Kano's lab in Tokyo. I think it's the University of Electrical Engineering. And she does a lot of calcium. And essentially, she just released a paper in 2025 looking at the repeated bout effect. And mitochondria plays a really big role in allowing you to clear and regulate calcium better. And that can be an adaptation from the repeated bout effect on that. There's also theory suggesting that your stretch activated ion channels, which when they open up, the calcium goes through, which leads to the accumulation of calcium, that those guys can actually get tighter, which is really interesting. And I think I spoke about that in one of my posts.
What would cause that?
Um, we don't know. I don't think people know.
I
I
think
mean,
that's
I don't
the answer
know.
for a lot of things, actually.
I don't. it I forgot the name of it because stretch activated ion channels are, from what I understand, a pretty general term. Um, I honestly don't know. I don't think we know what would cause the tightness of them. Maybe some, I forgot the name. It was like some flipping. There was a paper. It was like some flipping of the SIEZO channel, SIEZO. I got to relook at that. But yeah, some probably physiological flipping going on with that. Essentially, we don't know, but it's a theory where if it's a thing, they can get tighter. But main idea, your body adapts, repeated bout effect takes in. You can clear calcium better. Your Dr. Mackey, she made not a post, a paper also talking about some reorganizations of the muscle being able to withstand eccentric forces better to not, cause as much damage. So there is some, and I made a post about this recently too. It occurs, so I don't think there's really much to fear about calcium ions, to be honest. It is a thing. It is damaging. That's how damage occurs, from what we understand. And damage has been seen to be more of a biochemical process than a mechanical process. Although some still believe that there's still some sort of mechanical disruptions that occur, but very minimally. You don't really see like those micro tears or like those popping sarcomeres from Dr. Morgan Allen. I think he's the one that um, uh, uh, said that. But Walter Herzog recently completely disproved that, and it wouldn't make sense physically, like physiologically. Like, why would your sarcomeres pop? They could stretch within that range. And when you think about it, within the muscle system, with all these things covering the muscle, can we really get to those physiological lengths
Mm.
where the sarcomere would actually pop? I don't think so. It's been disproven. And we don't really see micro tears unless we're doing electrical muscle stimulation. Those is when like the Z line streaming and all that we see, that like those images we see on textbooks, that's mostly from electrical muscle stimulation, not voluntary contractions. And again, maybe if you do marathons, you might see some micro tears, but at the end of the day, we should be glad that we don't see micro tears in the muscle, because if we do, we won't be able to grow them back. Because then that's kind of suggesting that hyperplasia has to occur. Now, whether
Mm.
hyperplasia occurs is something completely different. We don't have to get into that. But we should be grateful that necrosis, the death of the muscle cell, doesn't occur either. So
Mm.
I think people kind of fearmonger too much the calcium fatigue things, is
Yeah,
my
I
stance.
mean, I think the I think the cell death comment you just at the end there, I think it's important. I don't think people actually understand what perception of effort is. I know that was way earlier on. But when we, the reason, basically, the theory is that not, I'm not talking to you, I know you know this, but the theory is basically that the perception of effort is the body's way of going, okay, like if we go any further, we're going to cause cell death. We better stop here. Like we're going to start to cause some real damage if we don't stop here. So that's like the evolutionary like mechanism for that happening is like, okay, the body's got to protect, the brain's got to protect the body in some way. We should stop an activity when it starts to become potentially quite harmful to us. So that is the proposed theory behind the perception of effort being the limiter in a set is that, okay, your brain's like, okay, any further, whatever's happening physiologically here is going to start really hurting us. Not maybe not physically, like you won't feel it necessarily, but we need to pull back. And so that's kind of, I'm sure there's plenty of people who don't even know why that perception of effort thing, because everyone tosses that around. Oh, the perception of effort's too high, blah blah blah. It's like, well, do you actually know what the theory behind it is? I think that's important to note for some people. But yeah, I mean, I agree that the fear mongering is sort of out of hand, and I actually took a step away from content recently, and then came back with not I wouldn't say I was more open-minded, but just I'm just framing things in a different way because I don't want to be seen as contributing to the fear-mongering and the, gaslight, whatever you want to call it, that is going on, maybe more so on TikTok. I think that, even Paul has had to go back on stuff recently, not back on stuff, but even be like, look, well, the difference between two and three is just not in frequency is just negligible, right? It's just not, it's not going to show up over the course of a year. And I think that something that I want to say again that I said with Jake yesterday was just like, if we're not doing these things for 5 years consistently, you're not like, I think these guys are thinking that, over the course of 6 months, the full body, the three times frequency is going to be like, all of a sudden we've got like, more plates, more dates, delts, sort of instead of whatever. And I think that like these are just unrealistic expectations assigned to some of these principles or, theories or whatever, where the if we set more realistic expectations, people wouldn't care as much. It's like the hyping up of like, I think it's a business thing, not anyone specific, but just like if as a content creator or a coach, whatever, if I assign more value and more growth to the thing I am promoting in my video, not only do I get more clicks or whatever, but maybe I get more coaching applications or whatever. And I think it's gotten to a point where it's like, if I can just say the most inflammatory thing, fear mongering, as you said, I'll get more views. Or if I can assign more value to the method I'm using, I'll get more money from coaching. And I just think that like we've got to be real with people. Most of the people on our Instagram are not paying for our service, and those are the people who are seeing our videos. So they don't, only a few people come into coaching and then get to see what we actually do. Everyone else is left with the fear monger statement that you use for your video, not you specifically. And I think that assigning more realistic expectations to these things, whether or not the stimulating reps theory does actually help that much. If it's 5 reps, if it's eight, I would bet my life savings that over the course of a year, 5 versus 8 is no different. Like, just honestly, we got to look at practically what is the quality of a 5 RM lateral raise. I know there have been people say, oh, you can lift with good form. I know, I've done it. But some people can't do that. And so, not everyone is filming their training. So, like, there are just so many nuances that either don't get touched on or can't fit in an Instagram video, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of frequency, I would actually encourage a consistent frequency of performing eccentric contractions, going back to the damage a little bit, because it's doing frequent eccentric contractions, or allowing to do them, is what kind of keeps those adaptations in place. If you stop doing eccentric contractions and then you go back to it, then yeah, you're going to see some pretty high damage.
Mm,
So instead of fearing, eccentric contractions and muscle damage, you should kind of like, yeah, kind of get past that point of, high damage, but and then try to maintain those adaptations. And you got to do that frequently, because then if you don't, your body's going to be like, well, we don't need this anymore,
mm.
right?
Well, I mean, that goes to say that, like, that sarcomerogenesis came to my head when you started saying that. And I think that, like, we're at a point now with the stretch stuff where people are just sort of, it's not a big topic anymore. I think, like, some people have been, like, accepted, okay, not everything needs a stretch. Other people sort of aren't talking about it as much anymore because it didn't show up in the leg press study or, the lateral raise study with the cable versus the dumbbell. And there was, like, the resistance profile differences and whatnot. And I think it's not really a fun topic anymore because we've accepted that not every muscle experiences it, right? Whether or not it does, I don't think anyone knows for certain. And the reason that, we don't even have data on the chaps, for example. I don't think so. And so we're at a point now where I see people using a range of motion. I'm like, dude, I know we don't maybe need the biggest stretch in the world on our biceps, but you're not even doing what even is even close to a full range of motion. Like you are just, it's not even close. Like I know what the internal moment arm is. I know that, we say that, the biceps don't get SMH, but it's like now we're just taking things too far. And it's just, and it's not even the educators necessarily on this side of the spectrum. It's the audience, in my opinion, that is taking things way too far to the point that we've all seen creators walk back on stuff and be like, "Hey, by the way, I know I said this, but you guys are now saying this, and I didn't say that, and you've taken it way too far." And I think that is sort of on us to maybe explain things better. I do my best to try to be nuanced, but again, we're taking these principles and we're taking them way too far where people, why would I like and that's why I wrote down in the notes, maybe we talk about what we think maybe the minimum dose is for stretch adaptations. We hear like just once a week, but then also in terms of minimum dose, we got to talk about actual range of motion as well. Like to what degree do you actually need to stretch the muscle to experience that stimulus? What do you think about one minimum dose in terms of frequency once per week, and then minimum dose in terms of total ROM?
Well, I mean, to answer that, I guess we'd have to go back to the fundamental concept of what I think stretch mediated hypertrophy is. I don't know if you want to get into that,
I
but
mean, hey, I'm happy to. I knew the topics would last a bit longer, and so I didn't write as many down. So I'm more than happy to if you feel we have the time.
uh, yeah, I think we could run through it. But essentially, from what I understand, people saying that stretch. First of all, I think the idea got boring, which is why I think people kind of stopped talking about it after talking about it for like a year or two. But and my stance has changed on this, not because of what you may think, though. So I used to think it was all about the stretch, but in reality, it's not. It's not. That said, people think that the benefits from eccentric or sarcomerogenesis, and the reason why we see, eccentrics grow as much muscle as concentrics is because, or the thickness grow is because of sarcomerogenesis. Um, Before that, with stretch mediated hypertrophy. First of all, I don't think eccentrics cause sarcomerogenesis. I don't think the data is very clear on that. And if it does, we could say that, and I spoke to Walter Herzog about this, who's, honestly one of the leading researchers on this. Um, they either don't cause eccentrics or they don't cause sarcomeres in series, or they do cause sarcomeres in series, but likely an insignificant, meaningful amount. Very, very small, right? So if that is the case, then I'm very skeptical on saying, well, eccentrics cause as much growth as concentrics because sarcomeres are added in series. But if it's a very likely insignificant amount, how can that cause a dramatic increase in muscle thickness? And now they say the Hornberger model, which is kind of just showing that if sarcomeres are added, in chains or whatever, it can increase muscle thickness. But first of all, Hornberger isn't a modeler. I think they overestimate some things, and the model is very unrealistic. But nonetheless, it's still like I don't think there's enough sarcomeres to be added in series to kind of fit into that model. I think, but nonetheless, with stretch mediated hypertrophy, I don't think the gains come from sarcomeres added in series. Is my point. Um, and I guess it's up to debate whether what we see stretch mediated hypertrophy, where the muscle is lengthened for hours on end with super high intensity, whether we see that in training, where it's just a couple seconds in the lengthened position for just a couple seconds in total. I don't know if it's the same mechanisms, if it's different mechanisms. I'm suggesting it's likely not, but it may have a mix. They may be overlapping a little bit because originally the whole lengthened partial thing comes from the first paper to be published on it by Dr. Jared McMahon from Ireland. And he looked at the biomechanics of it. It wasn't just about the stretch. He looked at the internal moment arms, the external moment arm, the neural input of the muscle, the activation, and the stretch. It's not just about the stretch. He believes that the stretch can add, like the passive tension that occurs, can add some benefit, but it shouldn't be overriding the active tension occurring, right? And just because we have more stretch occurring, what are the other biomechanical factors that are occurring? The reason why we don't see the quads grow so much going beyond 90 degrees, uh, he believes, because, well, first of all, the vasti muscles, the vastus lateralis, they exist very deep on the descending limb of the length tension relationship, which means that anything past 90 degrees, they're producing very little active tension. A lot of it is passive tension, but that passive tension isn't enough to offset that loss of active tension. Not to mention around 90 degrees, which is why in his first paper, he did lengthen partials on leg extension from 0 to 40 degrees and 40 from 90 degrees. And the 40 to 90 degrees grew more because there's this storm of optimal length tension relationship, a good strip passive tension occurring at that length. It's not going into super ranges of knee flexion where the vasti muscles are not producing enough active tension anymore. The internal moment arm of the quads, where the internal moment arm is smaller, um, uh, of course, this depends on the context, but in this case, if the internal moment arm is smaller, the muscle would receive more neural input, more activation, because the muscle would have to work harder to equate the torque at the joint. Um,
So I guess
and that's why
that's where we have to say that neuromechanical matching is a problem because what you just said is not in
it's
line with
I
that.
don't think I don't think it's I don't think that alone disproves it, but it is a factor. We could get into that in a bit. But yeah, I mean that's kind of why. So it's because there's this huge storm of these different factors of optimal length tension relationship, moment arm, whatever, stretch, that causes the muscle to grow in that range. But people took that and they're like, okay, well, it grows in a lengthened range. So let's just see the more stretch, the more growth. That's not really the case,
It's
right? And
extrapolating
that's
the
why,
data.
right. And that's Dr. When I spoke with him, he is currently, I think, writing a review kind of calling out all this garbage that's going into these studies, thinking that it's just about the stretch. He goes, there should be more focus on the biomechanical factors, on the exercises being selected, whatever. With the biceps, we see them that they don't really benefit from being trained at longer lengths. Well, I mean, a lot of them think that just because you're extending your shoulder, you're lengthening the biceps, when in reality, that's not really the case. It's mostly the tendon being lengthened, especially at really high velocities. And he measured this in vivo. I don't think this is published data, but when he spoke to me, he measured in vivo that the fibers weren't really changing length. They were kind of constant, which makes sense because the body wants to operate in an efficiency standpoint, right? And to do that, it kind of likes to keep the muscles as isometrically as possible to keep that optimal overlap, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of people think that, oh, well, the biceps don't benefit because of that. Well, I mean, first of all, they're not really being lengthened so much for that reason. And likely. And again, another thing is just he yeah, he's making that paper and it's just not about the stretch. I used to think the deeper the stretch, the more. And the overhead tricep extension study, if we look at the Stasinaki one from the Greek researchers, they went all the way down. But the Mayo study, they kind of went like 90 degrees. I'm maybe speculating here, but I think if you go all the way down and get that super deep stretch, I think you're getting increases in passive tension, but the loss of active tension could be being reduced to a point where it's not even worth it anymore. Of course, there's other limitations that we can talk about, but that maybe that's one theory. And in the Mayo study, they stopped at 90 degrees. So maybe this range right here could be sufficient because any deeper than that, then we may not see any benefits. Um, so, I mean, it's just other biomechanical factors that people aren't taking into consideration that
Mm.
is being misrepresented as it's the stretch mediated hypertrophy thing.
Mm. And I guess, that is all to say as well, like if we can, I don't think I can, but you guys can speculate, about the mechanisms. I don't think I'm in a place to. I think the big thing to sort of note and cover for everyone is just like practically, right? What does this mean in practice? Well, it means maybe you don't have to get the way that I approach this really is just like I'm going to use a full range of motion. I'm going to pretty much get, when I do bicep curl, like we could go through each muscle and talk about it. Like, I definitely think the lower body needs a good stretch. There was that one study that saw the glutes growing in a deep squat, and it's like, if they don't have great leverage there, it would have to be like theoretically have to be passive tension, right? Otherwise, because the adductors probably have way more activation. Why else would we see the glutes growing when they have like a bad moment in the bottom of a squat? So like I just think the lower body in general grows quite well with the stretch. I come from a powerlifting background, like I'm comfortable pressing with a stretch as well. I aside from that, like I'm maybe if I was doing shoulder presses, I would come down to what you might call a stretch. But when it comes to like triceps, biceps, like lats, I think is one where I think the implication of being super anal about the stretch is going to result in poor biomechanics. I think that what a lot of people, I'm not a biomechanics expert, and I'm going to do Joe's course because I'm really interested in it. But there's a lot of biomechanical problems that result of being too picky with these things. So you'll see a lot of people like, what's a good example? Basically just like sacrificing form, moving in a way that is not considered, optimal from a biomechanics standpoint in order to avoid the stretch or get the stretch or, whatever it might be. So just like stopping a single arm lat pull down where your arm is slightly bent here, and then all of a sudden we get like, you know, people are like, oh, I can feel my bicep tendon. It's like, yeah, why don't you straighten your arm at the top of each rep and like maybe get a little bit of a stretch and take some load off, and then initiate the concentric properly, like things like that, where it's like we're only seeing things through one lens. We're not remembering that there are other factors, like just movement quality, for example, that come with that are very important rather. And I think when these things come at the cost of other things like biomechanics, we have a real problem, which is why I'm pushing back against a lot of this stuff that I've spoken about in the past. Because I'm like, on its own, sure, you can talk about, whatever. But when you're a coach or you're giving information to everybody, I feel like I have a responsibility now to be like, this maybe doesn't matter so much. Let's just focus on, the big problems.
Yeah, and I think with the whole stretch thing is that it's like these four different factors, right? Moment arms, activation, stretch, whatever. It's like this bar of the stretch is filling up all with all the everyone's putting so much effort into the stretch where all these other factors are not getting any attention. And they think that just because there's more stretch occurring, there's more growth occurring. But in reality, we need kind of like a balance, an equilibrium between these factors to really get that growth in that longer length. And some of the muscles may not even grow from longer lengths because of not because of the stretch, but maybe it could be other factors. I mean, again, just because we're stretching the muscle, yes, we're getting more passive tension, but again, maybe I'm speculating here. It could be that active tension is more important than passive tension. So we don't really want to get the biggest stretch. The reason being why, I don't know. I mean, roughly 80% of your muscle is contractile protein. So, and a lot of that produces active tension. So maybe most of your muscle produces active tension. So, I mean, you kind of want to keep those proteins producing that active tension. I mean, at the end of the day, it's total tension that builds muscle, whether it's passive or active, right? Herman Vanderberg, I think Vanderberg from Brown University, he was a pioneer in this. He did a lot of data. I think he did a data from motion into mass. Was it that one, or I think it was Goldspink? Either way, passive or active tension builds muscle, but which one is more important, or at least in the context of resistance training, maybe active, just because most of your muscle is built out of things that produce active tension.
Logical.
It's logical. I don't know if it's true, but
Mm. I think, yeah, I mean, I think an interesting one while we're on the topic is the whole swing back against the you can bias portions of the lat. Now, why I honestly don't have an opinion on this. I don't care. I do one and I do the other on the other day. I don't overthink this stuff in my opinion. But what's interesting to me is now we're seeing like, this pendulum swing where it's like, well, if neuromechanical matching is true and regional hypertrophy happens, which I think we can all agree on, then based on the leverage, which will dictate the regional hypertrophy, we can prioritize, bias, whatever, a certain region of a muscle, say upper, lower lat, um, proximal, distal hamstring, whatever, based on, the way we're moving the joint or the joint action or the where the peak resistance profile is. And that's neuromechanical matching, right? Whatever has the most leverage will get the most activation, not necessarily produce the most force, because that depends on a lot of things like we've discussed before and we just mentioned earlier. And now we're seeing this swing backwards. Like, well, actually, the EMG data says that you can't, it's the same activation in extension and adduction. You can't do this, that. And it's like, I think I mean, I'd love to hear your opinion. I think honestly, I haven't made a post about it, but I think it goes against the model. How can you say that a muscle or a muscle region will get the highest activation based on its internal leverage, internal moment arm rather, and then say that it doesn't matter, even though we see big differences in peak activation, or at least EMG, in the studies.
okay. Well, I mean, before anything, before we get into the neuromechanical matching thing with the lats, I do think it's possible to bias different regions of the lats. When I spoke with James Wickham, he did a dissertation on this. It's like a 300-page dissertation that you can find for free online, where he talks about functional differentiation, meaning that whatever muscle has the best angle of pull or line of pull is going to be preferentially activated first. Of course, line of pull matching with the internal moment arm is how he states.
Mm.
And he has data neuromuscular compartments of the shoulder muscles, I think it was. And I think this was talking about the theory of compartmentalization, which is kind of stating that muscles are built in different compartments and certain compartments are activated depending on the task. And they noted that they saw significant difference in lat activation from different divisions based on the task. So that alone kind of shows that we can bias different divisions of the lats, at least in that environment that they did. It's possible. However, I will say that I think it was EMG and Dr. Korda, along with other people, kind of released papers proving that SCMG isn't really good for that. They like to use high density EMG, which I think is a better form to see if muscles can be biased and different. And they did it on the chest, I think, on the pectoralis major. But I mean, my question kind of just remains: I wouldn't be surprised if we can bias different divisions of the lats, but the lats is just such a broad muscle. I think it's possible. Just the question is it notable? If we can bias different divisions of the lats, will it have any meaningful difference? I don't know, but for me, it's like if I'm doing a lat pull down with some sagittal plane pulling, I think I'm good. I'm not like on an Olympian level thing where I have to worry about little technique issues or modalities and anything.
This is the thing is we're worried about maximizing. We haven't even started growing muscle, and we're worried about maximizing. It's like, brother, let's just like,
Let's start, you
yeah,
know?
let's just get some muscle. Let's get above 135 pounds. And I think that, I my last, practically, because I always love to go back to the practical application. Last block, I did pull down and I followed it up with a sagittal plane row, and it was fucking annoying and it pissed me off and I didn't like it and I stopped doing it after one block. Now I do a pull down. And it's honestly scapular plane. It's probably not even perfect. It's certainly not in the frontal plane based on the grip width and whatever. And then I do a sagittal plane row. Unilateral, bilateral doesn't really matter. But you could do just frontal plane pull downs like a traditional lat pull down, and then just do some chest support rowing for your traps, rear delts, and you'd get some upper lat, and then you probably tick all those boxes. And I think that, I think that again, focusing on, I don't think it's harmful to do one set of pull downs and one set of a row. I think that's fine. Like if you, I don't like, I think people think that just because an educator posted it, that person is certain about that topic. I don't think anyone is going to bet their life on any of this stuff because no one understands it that well. And no one can honestly say that they were 100% certain about anything. And I think that, like, I'm not convinced that you can't, same as you. I think you probably can based on, the line of pull, the peak resistance, whether it's frontal or sagittal, whether it's high or low. I think there's, like you said, it's a big muscle. It's got a massive surface area. It's, parts of the surface area have different orientations. They're vastly different locations. Someone's back is maybe, however many inches apart. Like, I just think there's too many moving parts. The shoulder joint is glenohumeral rhythm is too complex to all that stuff. I just think that there is too much to it to just sit down and be like, nah, you can't. Like, I'm not convinced. I haven't looked into it. I haven't watched the post because I truly don't care. But I think that, you know, like as long as we're maybe alternating throughout the year, every couple training blocks, as long as we're doing some chest support rowing, we're good. And I think that there is also a point to say, if we are going for like an X taper sort of aesthetic, Zizbra, David Lade look, maybe you don't want to have massive lower lats. Maybe you want to keep that part of your back a little bit, slimmer. I don't know. I had someone in the comment a couple months ago say, upper lat is bad for the X taper. And I was like, sorry? He's like, yeah, bro, you want to grow the lower lat. That's going to make the X taper better. And I was like, you realize where the lower lat is, right? On the body, it's lower, it's closer to the hips. You would not, and this was like someone with thousands of followers and like educational posts. I was like, you realize like geographically is probably not the right word, but like the upper lat is maybe going to make you look a bit more like a Dorito. And that's, if that is the case and we can really bias the upper lat, maybe you just want to do some front sagittal plane single arm stuff, and maybe the lower lat stuff is from an aesthetics point of view. I mean, I don't want my waist to get any fucking bigger. It's big enough as is. Again, I think we're worried about the wrong stuff here.
Yeah. That said, I mean, I know we're running a bit off of time, but I know you want to tackle the neuromechanical matching thing. If you want to get into that real quick,
Yeah, let's do
I
it.
think first of all, I think we should be careful. Actually, I'll say this after I explain everything. With the neuromechanical matching paper, like how they state in in the paper from 2010, I think it was with Gandivia and Hudson and uh, Jane Hudson, yeah, or Ann Hudson, sorry. Um, the idea of tasks groups has been around for a very long time, but mostly in the context of submaximal effort, right? One thing. And if I look at the paper, quick scan, they don't really challenge their hypothesis too much or their stance too much. The numbers could have been done with a lot of averaging. If you're good with statistics, you'll know what I mean.
I am
And
not.
I would like the data was not rigorous. I'm like I'd like to see more rigorous data. Oh,
Is that a fire alarm?
yeah, they're cooking upstairs.
You're all good, man.
You might have
Don't
to
worry
you might
about
have to
that.
cut this part. You might
No,
have to
we'll
cut this
leave it
part.
in. We'll leave it in. That's part of podcasting.
All right, well, Chris is after me, man. All
He's
right. There has always been the idea that the central movement coordination center in the brain chooses muscles that are most efficient. And this just goes back to the first nonlinear optimization model. And optimization models are just mathematical tools, computational too, that are used to find the best solution for a problem that has a lot of choices, right? If you understand neuromechanical matching, it's like, the internal moment arm could be a solution when there's a lot of choices within the muscle, what the brain chooses. It has a lot of choices to do, right? So I'll get into that in a bit. But essentially, the idea of neuromechanical matching, I think, is just a fancy name given to the optimization problem that was formulated, probably centuries ago. Um, Bernstein, I think, was one of the first. But yeah, it goes back to the first nonlinear optimization algorithm by Crowenshield and Brand back in 1981. And they suggest that muscles are recruited in a manner that minimizes muscle stress. And when you solve their optimization problem, if you're good with math, I don't even think I'm not near as good. The math is very complex, but when you solve their optimization problem, you'll find that muscles are recruited based on their physiological cross-sectional area, right, their size, and moment arm. So the moment arm has been a consideration for synergistic force sharing for the past 4 decades. It's not a new idea, and I think Chris has stated that. The thing is, for me, I think we should be careful when jumping from mechanics to motor control to physiology, right? From applying this mechanical concept all the way to saying that we should train like that. I think there's a big gap between each of those jumps. I don't know if you kind of want to go real quickly, maybe explain what neuromechanical matching is a little bit for the people who are kind of lost.
Mm.
But I'd also like to hear, because you spoke with Chris, kind of what his stance is, what it represents. I know some people get it confused with Henneman size principle and stuff.
Do they?
But I think so, yeah.
Holy
But
moly.
if you
I
could
mean,
clear that up before I continue.
I think that, I'm maybe not the best person for it. I don't speak for Chris. I'm gonna have Cooper Logan on here soon. He'll probably have a better explanation for you guys listening, and a lot of you will know him. But honestly, like in its sim I think the most simple way to sort of say it is just like every muscle has a little internal moment arm. It's math. And if it's better, the brain is going to send more recruitment there because the brain operates from an efficiency standpoint, as you mentioned just before, an optimization standpoint, where it's like if I can send activation to the muscle that has the best capacity to do a certain joint action or produce force at a joint, why would I send it somewhere that had a worse capacity or ability to do it? Because that would cost me more energy. So let's take, numbers for example. If one internal moment arm is twice as good as another internal moment arm, then if I send it to the worst one, I'm going to have to send twice as much there. So to get the same force output at the joint. So I think it's just like the brain does a little bit of a calculation or whatever, and sends the activation to said muscle because it's going to have the best choice. It's going to max out earlier. So we can use an example, say the rear delts, the lats, and the traps, right? Or not the traps. Let's just say the rear delts and the lats. The rear delt has a better internal momentum than the lats, right? So the brain in a sagittal plane movement is going to send all its activation straight away to the rear delt. It's going to max out really, really early based on the total muscle size, the length tension relationship, the line of pull, whatever. And then it's going to immediately attempt to max out the lats because the lats are much bigger. They have a way easier job doing shoulder extension. The rear delt realistically is helping, right? Same sort of principle goes to the is it Terry's major, the lats helper, Terry's major, little lat helper in the data, where it's just like, the Terry's major helps the lat. We can speculate whether or not it's, upper back pull downs, whatever the whole coach, that's a cast different side of things, but the Terry's Mage is a good example where it's probably got better leverage, I think, better internal momentum than the lat, but it's not going to do shit because it's way fucking smaller. And so, of course, it gets maxed out really early, and then the activation goes straight to the lat after. And I guess the thing is like, well, if the lat's going to end up doing it anyway, why doesn't it just like skip? Why doesn't it just skip the other two muscles? I don't think the brain has the systems in place. It has to go off. We have to agree that it goes off something, right? Or at least there's a group of things that influence it. But basically, like for you guys listening, it's just like there's internal moment arms. You can Google what they are. You can get up bicep internal moment arm. You can Google all that stuff, and then you can just literally look at which ones are bigger. There's studies that look at entire joints and all the muscles that act on the joints and the leverages, and you can just literally categorize from start to finish what's going to have more activation as the difficulty of the task increases. So like super super easy task, like I'm say pulling a piece of like a really light rope. I'm going to pull like this. Maybe I only need my rear delt. But then I started doing a lat pull down or just like a pull down. Let's take out the confusion. I'm going to turn my rear delt on and then my lat and then, or Terry's rear delt lat, maybe trap as well a little bit, whatever is needed to do said job. And it's just like a sequential thing where it's like, let's activate all these muscles based on the effort. So, well, I guess it is, I guess the Henneman size principle plays in here somewhat that it's just like as the demand of the task increases, the brain will then recruit muscles based on internal moment arm from a point of efficiency. Hopefully that's explained like relatively well. I think the rear delt's a good example. Um, I think my question is always just like the implications of this are actually maybe of everything. The implications of this are the greatest practically because if we are only going off internal moments, that could change like entire exercise selection. It could change entire resistance profile selection. And so this could actually have an impact, in my opinion.
It could, but I don't think it does. Mm, yeah. So, like I said, motor unit recruitment has been a core concept in motor control for a while now. It's a core principle, and but I think the mistake that people make is that they believe that we can assume or base what the central nervous system is doing based off of leverage alone. I think that's completely incorrect. Now, by the way, I'm no expert in this. This is neuromechanics. I'm not a PhD. I'm no expert in this. I always, if anything I say, take it with a grain of salt. I just hope to kind of bridge a gap into the more complex side of things. At the end of the day, I mean, I I best recommend to email the researchers themselves. I could give some names at the end, who are really good with this. But essentially, the central nervous system typically recruits muscles that can contribute to a movement, right? Or all muscles that can contribute to a movement. Now, the question is the degree to which muscles or to which each muscle is activated, right? That's kind of what everyone is questioning. And how that force sharing is determined by the central nervous system. And there are certainly many factors, but even muscle leverage is deceptively complicated. In theory, every factor that can contribute to force production is considered. So it's not just moment arm. But if muscles were ideal force accutators, I think I used that word right, then muscles with larger moment arms would produce more torque per unit of activation. However, muscles are complicated. They're not as simple as an actual mechanical thing that's built like we see in physics class or anything, right? Muscles have highly non-linear
It's not a crane.
properties.
It's not a
It's
crane,
not
for
it's not
example.
it's not a crane. They have highly non-linear properties such as the force length relationship and the force velocity relationships. So for a given change in joint angle, a muscle with a larger moment arm can undergo a greater change in length, but it will shorten faster, resulting in less force at a given level of activation due to the force velocity relationship. So having a smaller moment arm, right, less leverage, sure, will result in less torque for a given muscle force, but having a larger moment arm can actually impair muscle force production during the movement, right? And this could affect the amount of torque being produced. And these are just some factors that the CNS takes into consideration somehow during movement, right? So, just because a muscle is a larger moment arm doesn't mean it's automatically mechanically advantageous, right? Muscles are complicated. Like I said, they have different properties and relations that just thinking of it as a crane where it's, oh, greater moment arm, therefore it can produce more torque, sure, but how is the muscle force going about that?
Mm.
I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if I lost some people.
Oh, I mean, I think, I think we probably all have to sit down and really look at it to fully see what it would change in terms of our training style. Like I think I'd have to go through every example of every exercise and be like, okay, well, if neuromechanical matching is not true, what do I change here? And I think that the biggest clue is just like how different are the exercises being done by, say, someone like Cass, who I know is on this your sort of side of things. How different are his exercises from, say, someone on the Chris coaches? Like how different is the training actually looking, and how much of a practical uh, effect is this going to have? And I think there might be some minor, maybe exercise changes or maybe resistance profile changes, but realistically, it's not changing your whole style of training. Before I learned neuromechanical matching and after I learned about it, it doesn't look that different because we were already doing that stuff by accident. Now I do it because I kind of think there's some good theory there. Maybe it's useful in a way. My coaching style hasn't changed that much. Maybe like very specific cueing recommendations and when I watch a client do something.
I think it's a cool concept. I won't lie. I think the idea of it is pretty cool, and obviously, someone who's getting into the science-based lifting, I think they see it as something like just they just see it as something that's cool. Like they're like, okay, well, I mean, if we could find a way, like it makes logical sense. It's something that makes logical sense. They're gonna be like, if it's logical, it must be true. However, if you take philosophy, just because something is logical doesn't mean it's valid. But it looks cool, it sounds cool, and I think that's what brings a lot of people in saying that, like, well, I mean, people who just look at it from a surface level, it makes sense, and when you tell them it doesn't really make so much sense when you start considering the actual biomechanics of things. Which, by the way, I think many people put biomechanics in their bio that they teach biomechanics, but they don't. Social
I,
media biomechanics is not the same as real biomechanics, where they
I,
actually quantify numbers and they do these complex equations.
Yeah, I mean, as
Sorry,
someone
what were you gonna say?
who I was just gonna say, as someone who I feel pretty confident in my coaching ability in terms of getting someone to move well and understanding why they should move a certain way. I've done anatomy, I've seen cadavers, all that I've done biomechanics at uni. I haven't even considered using that, not even considered using that word to describe myself and my, if I dare, influence on anybody else. So I think that there are definitely people with biomechanics, being thrown around where it's like you have not earned the right to even use that word. And I'm not even talking about anyone specifically. I've just seen it, and I think that biomechanics is yeah. I mean, there are definitely people saying that who should not be saying that, and
It's hard. I mean, as someone who's in biomedical engineering, I'm dying. Um, I it's not easy. It's a lot of differentiation stuff, and I don't even know. But basically, I think what people on social media like to do is call it. I think I'd call it exercise mechanics, which was a term coined by Tom Purvis from Resistance Training Specialist. Because I think he even stated that he doesn't teach biomechanics. He was the one originally who kind of is incorporating all these mechanics of biomechanics and trying to apply them into exercise. So he kind of coined the term exercise mechanics. He's not teaching biomechanics; he's just teaching ways that we can apply this. And I mean, yeah, if you're really interested, I think resistance training
RPS.
specialist RTS is a good certification. I think they also have a one in Europe called Integra Education, whatever, by Michael, I think his name is.
I'm gonna
But
do Joe's. I'm gonna do hypertrophy coaches biomechanics one. I know he's heavily influenced by Tom, and
yes,
RPS or RTS rather is coming. They came to Australia and I couldn't go, and so they're coming back, I believe, next year. And I'm gonna do it. And also, if Joe runs his seminar at the same time next year that he did this year, I might be in America for the Arnold. So I'm a big fan of Joe, and I know Tom taught him a lot. And RPS seems quite cool. I've had some interesting interactions with one of the guys from RTS who loves to send me a DM whenever I make a claim about movement or whatever, and he tells me I'm wrong. But I respect him enough I can't remember his name. He sends me these long paragraphs whenever like he's done it a few times where it's like what you said is wrong. I think I made a claim about where we should load a sagittal plane pull down or like a single arm row, like where the ideal. I was like, we should probably have the resistance somewhere in the mid to maybe slightly toward the short, and then he blew my DM up with it. But anyway, I am interested in their product, and I think they know more about mechanics than me. So yeah, I agree.
I think, like I said, I think their concepts are cool. But I think many people take the course and come out thinking that they're biomechanics experts when in reality they're nowhere near. I mean, if you look at PhD students, honestly, shout out to Jeff. He's a mentor of mine. He is a exercise physiologist. He honestly he took RTS, but he's going for his PhD and he's been doing this for a very long time, and he still doesn't consider himself a biomechanics expert. Um,
Mm.
so I mean, let alone I'm probably just getting started. But at the end of the day, I think kind of just going back to neuromechanical matching, I don't think of it as a new way to strength train. I mean, no, like without a doubt, I'm not saying that muscle leverage doesn't play a role. I think it does play a role, and I think it does play an important role. But even if that was the only factor, I mean, the question that comes in my head is how does the central nervous system even know what the magnitude of the muscle moment arms are? And how do they change with joint rotation? Because there's no physiological sensors that convey that information. And that's what makes it such an interesting area of research, but also so frustrating for the researchers when trying to understand how the system works, right? And it's also important to understand, like I said in the beginning, a lot of these task groups have been with submaximal efforts. So these minimum effort solutions in general, like muscle stress and stuff, they're only meant to be relevant to submaximal activities, right? And there was a recent paper showing how motor unit recruitment can change with different intensities. So the application of this minimum effort objective to a maximum effort task kind of will be, I guess, ill-imposed. Um, I'm not sure about, again, I think the question here is, I don't know how this applies to resistance training, but there is a whole literature on optimal control simulations of activities like sprinting, right? Athletes like sprinting and maximal height jumping, vertical jumps, where the optimal controls are like bang, right? Where a muscle is just on and it contributes maximally, not efficiently, not most efficiently. And when we talk about resistance training, it could be like efficiency is no longer the main task. We're looking at the gastroc muscles and whatever and walking, like that's kind of something about efficiency. I mean, over time, evolution has taught us to be efficient, which is why, when we look at things like gait and walking, it is about efficiency. But as soon as we get into the gym and start lifting like crazy, uh, and lifting one rep maxes or just heavy weight regardless, it's kind of hard to just predict what the nervous system is going to be doing because it may not even be about efficiency anymore. The body just wants to do whatever it can to lift the weight. It can't be
Mm,
as picky per se, right?
mm,
And not to mention, I mean, people are using the respiratory muscles from the neuromechanical matching paper. Those muscles act freely within the body, by the way. And when we get into resistance training setting, we're setting up ourselves in an unnatural way, I guess, where we're kind of like forcing ourselves into certain positions within machines or whatever. And I mean, I don't know how much of an impact that plays, but just understand that we're looking at this data in muscles that function freely, naturally. And then in resistance training, we're putting ourselves in positions that I
mm,
guess aren't considered so naturally. We're just trying to train the muscles in whatever way. So we're forcing ourselves into, I don't know, elevated squat. We're just trying to force our knees forward, and how that changes how the brain recruits things, I don't know. I mean, and again, it's not just moment arm. I mean, when we talk about physiological cross section area, if a muscle has a bigger moment arm than another muscle, but the muscle with the smaller moment arm is just larger, that muscle with a bigger moment arm isn't going to be able to produce as much of a moment as the muscle that's larger, right?
mm,
So again, it's really complicated, and I believe Professor Umberger from the University of Michigan also looks into this. He's also a beast, so uh, I think he should be well respected within the literature. If you are going to get into this, Ben Prelutsky from Georgia Tech also looks at motor control stuff. He's done a lot of work on this. Um, and yeah, I just, again, my stance is just I think we should be cautious when trying to apply mechanics to motor control to physiology. I just think we're making a lot of gaps when jumping to each stage, I
mm,
guess. That's a good way
mm.
to put it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to take in. And if you guys listening made it this far, I'm congratulations. I think you've got you've survived the TikTok attention span. I think that there is a lot of good stuff in here. Whether or not we have given anyone any light bulb moments, I don't know, but I hope that we've sort of, or at least Juan has like opened your mind up to, I'm certainly very open to being wrong and having conversations with other people where, I've asked you questions before, and I'm sort of trying to put myself in situations where I would be challenged, whether it's the biomechanics course or I've done some N1 stuff, but I'll probably, hopefully get to a seminar one day and things like that where maybe it's not my traditional approach. But I really do appreciate your time, and I think, I'll when I share this, like if you guys are not following Juan, you need to be like um the quality and the frequency and the simplicity of the posts is I mean maybe not all of them are super simple, but absolutely worth following and worth reading. So again, I really appreciate your time, and the listeners, if you made it this far, let us know, and again, we appreciate your attention span and your support.
Well, I mean, I appreciate hopping on, and I mean, here we're tackling some big
Mm.
unresolved questions in the biomechanics and motor control literature. So I don't think you guys should be stressing out if we don't know what's going on, because, like I said, these big names, they have no idea what's going on either.
Mm.
Like these models and stuff, motor control model optimization problems or whatever. Some of them were used for man-made objects like missiles and things, and they try to apply it to humans or actual living organisms, and they could be missing the point. And all these mathematics that they use to try to predict what the nervous system is doing, I think can is more should be seen or is just an analogy, right?
Mm.
So it's complicated. I'm always down for discussions. If people want to reach out to me here in the comment section, I'm more than happy to talk about it. Like I said, I'm no expert, but I could always recommend people who are, if you do want to ask some serious questions on it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I certainly have enjoyed this. And I hope everyone listening has too. I won't take any more of your time. Thank you so much for coming on, and I'll speak with you soon.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.